This is a true life story. In the quiet streets of Kiev, Iryna Zarutska spent her early years under shadows she never chose. The looming presence of war, the tremors of bombs, the fear that 2022 would bring to her doorstep. Born in May 2002, Iryna grew up surrounded by art and heritage. She studied art restoration in Kiev and dreamed of creating beauty from damage. But when Russia invaded, her life changed in one violent sweep. Her family fled, packing up fragments of their old life and carrying them to a new land across the ocean. In 2022, they arrived in the United States, settling in North Carolina. In Charlotte, she began anew. She worked odd jobs at a pizzeria, among others, while learning English, enrolling in classes, and slowly weaving a new existence from the ruins left behind by war. Friends and family remember her as gentle, resilient, someone who held what remained of her homeland in her heart while trying to build something safe in a foreign place. She was ordinary in so many ways, and that was her strength. But on August 22nd, 2025, fate intervened in the most brutal way. That evening, Iryna had just clocked out from her shift. She climbed aboard the Lynx Blue Line train at the East/West Boulevard station in Charlotte. She found a seat, phone in hand, earbuds in place, as commuters drifted around her in routine silence. Unbeknownst to her, just a few seats behind sat a 34-year-old man named Decarlos Brown Jr. He had no connection to her, no shared history, no encounter that evening. But in just a few minutes, his life and hers would collide in unimaginable violence. Minutes passed. Surveillance cameras later showed the man reach into his pocket, remove a folding knife, pause, then rise and strike. 3 swift stabs from behind, one aimed at her neck. The impact was immediate. Panic erupted. Passengers screamed. Some froze. Others rushed to help. Iryna collapsed. Within seconds, the train car became a crime scene. An ordinary ride turned deadly in a heartbeat. Emergency crews arrived. Though they tried, they could not save her. She was pronounced dead. She never had the chance to say why. Who was this killer? What led a man to commit such a senseless act on a crowded train against someone he never knew? And how did someone with a documented history of crime and mental distress continue moving freely until that moment? Over the next days, as more details were uncovered, the public would question not just the crime itself, but the system that allowed it to happen. In pursuing her story, Iryna's life, the forces that conspired against her, the failures and the fight for justice. We follow the trail of surveillance footage, court filings, witness statements, and the records of troubled man. What you're about to hear is the fuller accounting. Her journey from war to hope, the violent night she died, and the battle for accountability in her name. Because though she was silenced that night, her life demands to be heard. Welcome to True Crime Tapes, where we bring you the most gripping, mysterious, and heart-stopping stories from the world of true crime. If you're fascinated by the unknown and want to uncover the secrets that the world tries to hide, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a chilling story. And for those of you already part of our community, welcome back. We're glad to have you with us. Drop a comment below to share your thoughts and theories, because we love hearing from you. True Crime Tapes. The truth is always stranger than fiction. The summer evening air in Charlotte was warm, the kind that carries city noise into train cars and mingles with the faint hum of air conditioning. On August 22nd, 2025, at about 9:46 p.m., Iryna Zarutska stepped onto the Lynx Blue Line train at the East/West Boulevard station. Surveillance footage later shows her entering, choosing a seat, settling in. She was dressed in her pizzeria uniform, exhausted after her shift, earbuds in one ear, phone in her hand. She likely typed a quick message, almost home, as she often did. Around her, passengers drifted in and out, the usual murmur of a light rail car. Feet on the floor, quiet conversations, occasional announcements over the speaker. Behind her, unseen by Iryna, sat Decarlos Brown Jr. He had already boarded earlier. Cameras later captured him riding the trains in the hours before. Footage shows him laughing quietly to himself, making odd movements with his head and mouth, muttering under his breath, behavior that caught no one's attention at the moment. At one point, around 8:34 p.m., audio shows him chuckling to himself, alone, for no apparent reason. For nearly an hour, he remained on the transit system, moving between stations unnoticed. He exited a train at the I-485 stop around 8:55 p.m., but re-entered later. The precise path over that hour remains murky in the footage. Security records show that earlier in the evening, 2 transit security officers passed by Brown on the platform around 8:18 p.m. They did not interact with him. By the time Iryna boarded, he was already in that same car. Surveillance images later show her seated directly in front of him, facing away. There was no recorded conversation, no glances exchanged, no confrontation. Minutes ticked by. At about 9:50 p.m., the moment shattered everything. According to court records and law enforcement statements, Brown reached into the pocket of his hoodie, pulled out a folding pocket knife, paused, then stood. He unfolded the blade. In one swift motion, he struck, plunging it into Iryna's throat from behind. The blow was ferocious, precise, instantaneous. Her world tilted. Blood blossomed. The train car erupted. Some passengers screamed. Others froze, unsure. A handful lunged forward, tried to help. One pressed against the wound on her neck, trying to stem the flow. Others fumbled for phones, dialing 911 with trembling hands. Panic spread like wildfire. Brown struck 2 more times in rapid succession. 3 total stabs. At least one landed high, into her neck. Officials later documented a grave wound to the center of her throat, plus a smaller cut near her knee. Iryna recoiled, stunned, disoriented. She attempted to steady herself, but blood flowed fast. Then, as suddenly as it began, he stopped. He backed away a bit. He made no rush to flee. He didn't collapse in a panic. Instead, he calmly walked toward the train doors. Surveillance footage shows him stepping off the car at the next station just 2 minutes after the stabbing. Authorities later reported that his own hand was injured, possibly clipped during the attack, and he removed his hoodie, pressing it against the wound as though it were a minor scratch. He walked away, unimposing, leaving chaos behind him. Meanwhile, in the moment after the attack, Iryna slumped. Others scrambled. Some abandoned the car entirely and sprinted across platforms seeking help. Others stayed, unwilling or unable to move. The train hushed in suspended horror. Paramedics arrived minutes later. They found her critically wounded, unresponsive. She was pronounced dead shortly after 10 p.m. In one of the darkest twists, Brown was arrested almost immediately on the platform. He was brought in for medical treatment for the lacerated hand, then booked for the murder. In that span of a few terror-struck minutes, a life was snuffed out, a city held breathless, and countless questions began to swirl that no one at the time was fully prepared to answer. The moment the knife struck, the train car's composed hum shattered into disarray. Passengers gasped. Some screamed. Others froze, eyes wide, unsure what to do as blood pooled on the seat and floor before them. A few stood in place, paralyzed by shock. The sight of a young woman, once so ordinary, collapsing in a crisis was too much too fast. One passenger, closer than most, sprang into motion. He leaned over her, pressing his hands to the wound on her neck in a desperate bid to stop the bleeding. Another grabbed napkins or paper scraps, pressing them against her as a makeshift dressing. Phones shook in trembling hands as others dialed 911, voices cracking. Nearby, someone shouted for help, their voice cracking with fear. Others did not move. Some backed away. Some looked at the attacker as he stepped off, stunned by what they'd just witnessed. One witness later described seeing the victim lying in a growing red pool, with no one rushing forward to intervene immediately. WCSB Charlotte +1. On the platform outside, bystanders heard screams. Several ran from one end to the next, attempting to alert security or police. Others flagged down the next arriving train car. The whole station became part of an unfolding tragedy. Within minutes, law enforcement and paramedics arrived. Officers secured the scene, ushering bystanders back behind yellow tape, coordinating with transit security. Paramedics rushed toward her, lifted her gently onto a stretcher, and covered her with a sheet. They checked for pulse, administered emergency measures, oxygen for lines, attempts to staunch the bleeding. All the while, the passengers who had witnessed it stood in silence, some crying, some shaking, others on their phones talking to family or calling for help. In the dim station lights, the realization settled in. Something innocent, something peaceful, had ended violently in that car. Despite every effort by first responders, the wounds were too severe. She was declared dead at the scene, her life extinguished before the night grew deeper. As the crowd cleared and the emergency teams packed up, the station remained stained by more than blood, haunted by the sudden absence of a life, the stunned faces of witnesses, and a chilling question. How could such violence find her so unexpectedly? The name Decarlos Brown Jr., 34 years old, emerged almost immediately after Iryna Zarutska's murder, but his appearance in the case was not a sudden twist. For more than a decade, he had been known to law enforcement in Mecklenburg County. His past arrests, his convictions, his release, and his mental health journey all preceded that fateful night. Brown's criminal record stretches back to 2007, starting with misdemeanors, simple assault, disorderly conduct, resisting a public officer. Many of those early cases did not result in severe penalties. Some were dismissed or led to probation. Between 2011 to 2014, his charges escalated. He was convicted of breaking and entering, a felony, and given probation. But while on probation, Brown committed more serious offenses. He was arrested for robbery with a dangerous weapon and for possession of a firearm as a felon. That case led to a conviction. In 2015, he was sentenced to prison, more than 5 years, for those serious felony offenses. When he was released in September 2020, the hope, for some, was that this might mark a turning point. Instead, his troubles only deepened. After 2020, Brown continued to be arrested multiple times. Some charges were lowered or dismissed. Others did not lead to long sentences. Well before the tragedy, Brown had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, a diagnosis made known by family members and public records. His mother and sister both spoke publicly about behavior that suggested his mental state had deteriorated significantly after his release from prison in 2020. One clear warning sign came in January 2025 when Brown repeatedly called 911, claiming that man-made material had been implanted in his body. He said this material was controlling when he ate, walked, and spoke. He believed someone or something was manipulating or puppeteering him. Police charged him with misuse of emergency services. In that same period, his mother tried to have him involuntarily committed. She described him becoming more paranoid, more agitated, speaking of materials of being controlled. Hospitals, however, either had no beds or deemed him not meeting standards for forced treatment. A judge, in July 2025, ordered a competency evaluation to determine whether Brown was fit to stand trial for his prior misuse of 911 arrest. That evaluation, however, never happened in time to alter his status before the attack. He remained free, living homeless or in shelters, with his illness untreated in many respects. So by the time August 22nd came around, Brown was not simply a complete unknown. His past had been loud with signals. A violent felony record, convictions for robbery with a dangerous weapon, paranoia, delusions, documented mental illness, multiple arrests, at least 14 in total, over many years, released from prison, homeless or unstable. And yet, nothing in the legal process had definitively stopped him that evening. Nothing forced him into treatment, nothing physically restrained him, nothing ensured he would be supervised. His mind, already unraveling, had been left to wander freely until it snapped. The moment surveillance video surfaced, investigators moved fast. The footage left little room for doubt. The sequence was clear, methodical, and horrifying in its normalcy. From the footage, one sees Iryna board the Lynx Blue Line car, sit down, plug in her earbuds, begin typing on her phone. For minutes later, Decarlos Brown reaches into his pocket, unfolds a knife, then suddenly rises and strikes her 3 times from behind. The act is unprovoked. There is no recorded interaction, no warning, no struggle before the first blow. abcnews.com. Officers responded quickly. At the scene, they collected a folding pocket knife found near her body, along with other items from the train car. The knife became the central piece of physical evidence. Forensics teams swabbed surfaces for fingerprints, collected DNA samples from the weapon, and tested trace evidence where possible. Surveillance cameras from adjacent cars and stations were synchronized to build a timeline. Eyewitnesses corroborated the video. Some describe how the assault unfolded in seconds, how Brown pulled the knife and then walked away calmly. They recalled seeing him press something to his hand, later determined to be his hoodie, as he exited. Their statements enriched the timeline and behavioral profile used by prosecutors. Because the crime occurred on a mass transit line, federal authorities joined in. Officials charged Brown under a federal statute for committing an act causing death on a mass transportation system. That charge allowed prosecutors to seek severe penalties, including the possibility of a federal death sentence. Meanwhile, at the state level, Brown was indicted on first-degree murder, the highest degree under North Carolina law. Prosecutors assembled their case around 3 pillars: the surveillance footage, the physical evidence, knife, DNA, fingerprints, and eyewitness testimony. Because the video captured the attack so cleanly and unambiguously, the strength of the prosecution's case was formidable. There was, however, a complicating factor: Brown's mental health record. From the start, his defense would challenge whether he was competent to stand trial, and whether he should be judged by standard criminal rules or by those governing insanity defenses. Almost immediately after Brown's arrest, questions were raised about his ability to understand the proceedings and assist in his defense. Earlier in the year, his public defender had filed a motion suggesting Brown might not be fit to stand trial, citing records of delusions and erratic behavior. WBTV.com. A judge ordered a competency evaluation, a standard procedure when mental fitness is in question. Psychiatrists would examine Brown's medical history, past diagnoses, behavioral reports, and present conduct. They would test whether he comprehended his charges, understood courtroom roles, and could rationally confer with his lawyer. If deemed incompetent, Brown could have been committed to a psychiatric facility until he recovered enough to proceed. That delay might push the trial back months or even years. But if ruled competent, the case would move forward swiftly. Because Brown faced both state and federal charges, the death penalty emerged early as a possible outcome. Under the federal statute, a conviction for causing death on a mass transit system can carry the maximum penalty, including death, if aggravating factors are met. At the state level, first-degree murder also permits the harshest sentences under North Carolina law. Political pressure mounted. Some officials and public voices demanded the death penalty. Former President Trump, for example, explicitly called for Brown to be awarded the death penalty. The dual prosecutions added complexity. The defense would need to argue both jurisdictions' rules, mental health standards, and sentencing guidelines. The stakes were high. The prosecution's narrative was straightforward and severe: an unprovoked murder caught on video, overwhelming physical evidence, a victim who came to the U.S. seeking safety but died at the hands of a violent offender. The defense's narrative would hinge on mental illness, possible impairments of free will and culpability, and the requirement that punishment only be applied to those fully responsible under the law. Once the footage went viral and news spread, the reaction was swift and fierce. Within days, the city of Charlotte and beyond was pulsing with grief, anger, and demanding change. In late September, hundreds gathered in South End Charlotte at the East/West Boulevard station, the very place where Iryna had boarded that night. They lit candles, carried flowers, held signs with her name, and listened to speeches remembering who she was. The vigil was meant not only to mourn, but to insist she not be forgotten. Support poured in. A GoFundMe page, started in Iryna's name, raised funds for her funeral costs and to help her family cope. Social media swelled with posts praising her kindness, noting how a young refugee had tried so hard to build a better life only to have it cut short. Many donated, shared her story, and called for accountability. But the emotion turned to rage when details surfaced about how the system had handled her attacker. People questioned how someone with 14 prior arrests, a history of violent offenses, and documented mental health issues had remained free. Why had he never been compelled to receive treatment? Why courts failed to act decisively? That frustration echoed in news commentary, op-eds, and viral threads calling for criminal justice reform. Then came a moment that crystallized public scorn. In a meeting meant to discuss Iryna's murder, the Charlotte City Council paused their special session to break for birthday cake. The images went viral. Council members smiling as they celebrated, then returning to talk transit safety. For many, that juxtaposition was jarring, tone-deaf, and deeply disrespectful to the memory of a woman murdered just weeks earlier. Officials attempted to explain it as a short recess for a council member's birthday, but the optics were disastrous. Citizens demanded apologies, transparency, and a demonstration that their leaders grasped the gravity of what had happened. Local media also came under fire. Many outlets had initially given her story little coverage. Critics accused them of downplaying the case until it was forced in a national spotlight. Meanwhile, community organizers led calls for better reporting on crimes that affect immigrants and marginalized communities. In the halls of power, steps were taken. State legislators pushed through Iryna's law, a package aiming to tighten bail rules, limit pretrial release, and expand when mental health evaluations are required. Council members pledged to review transit security, increase police presence on the Lynx line, and reassess mental health crisis response protocols. Amid the fury and demands for justice, one thread remained constant. People insisted that Iryna's life not be reduced to her death. To the many who knew her, friends, family, co-workers, Iryna Zarutska was more than tragedy. She was hope in motion. Born in Ukraine, she had lived through air raids and displacement, then joined her family in North Carolina, learning English by night, working by day. Her job at a local pizzeria wasn't glamorous, but she took pride in it. She dreamed of a stable life, of helping those she cared about, and of contributing something meaningful in her adopted home. Her sudden death resonated not just because it was brutal and unprovoked, but because it struck someone whose life represented survival, resilience, and the quest for refuge. Many began to see her as symbolic not only of immigrant struggle, but of broader systemic failures, of mental health systems overwhelmed, of courts stretched thin, of laws that don't always protect the vulnerable. In Charlotte, a movement emerged to rename the East/West Boulevard station in her honor. Her portrait appeared in community murals. Memorials dotted the station, flowers, candles, notes, art. She became, in many minds, a reminder that safety, justice, and dignity are not guarantees, even in places people believe are safe. Her family, while grieving, urged the public not to share graphic footage of her final moments. They asked for respect, for her memory to be preserved with dignity rather than spectacle. Over time, Iryna's story has been invoked in discussions far beyond Charlotte. In panels on mental health policy, transit safety, immigrant rights, and criminal justice reform, her name is cited as a case study, the one that should never have happened. Her life, suddenly extinguished, has become a catalyst for scrutiny, change, and remembrance. She fled bombs in her homeland, escaping one form of violence in search of safety. She arrived in a new country with nothing but hope and possibility. But the system that promised protection failed her tragically. Her life was quiet, unassuming, and yet, in its abrupt ending, it pierced the quiet of a city and a nation. It exposed gaps that had long waited for a victim to expose them. It summoned grief, outrage, and rarely seen unity among strangers. And though she no longer walks among us, her memory demands something from us: accountability, compassion, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Let us remember her not only as the victim of a night's violence, but as a person who strove to rebuild, to belong, to live her dream. Let us press forward so that no other family sees their loved one's life ended because a system failed to act. In the echoes of silence, in the flicker of candlelight at that station, in every reform debated, in every vigil held, her story lingers. May we honor it, may we learn from it, and may we never forget. She asked only for a chance, and though that chance was stolen, her life still speaks. If you believe stories like Iryna's deserve to be told, remembered, and learned from, we invite you to subscribe to this channel. Your support helps keep these voices alive and ensures that no one's story fades into silence.